Well, good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Live with Pastor Al. I'm your host, Pastor Al Davis. I'll be with you until 2 o'clock. And if you've been listening to the previous program with Pastor Lutz, we have been talking about the Chinese coronavirus situation and how churches, how pastors, how Christians are reacting, and looking at what's happening in our country. And we're going to continue that discussion here. Just a quick reminder that you can find us online at livewithpastoral.com. That's livewithpastoral.com, or on Facebook at facebook.com/livewithpastoral. And I'm in the process right now of trying to get this streamed over there from our YouTube page. And so you can certainly watch us there as well. So give us a few minutes and we should be on that page as well. But we are joined in the studio. We've got Pastor John Lutz with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Pastor Al.
And
glad we can be together.
I'm glad to have you here. And he's repented of his trip to Vegas here recently. And we were talking about that in the last half and things of that nature. But you got to have a little humor when you're facing some of these things.
And the Lord sits in heaven and laughs, so why shouldn't we?
Right. Well, isn't laughter a good medicine?
That's right.
Cheerful heart.
That's right.
And so then, of course, we've got Brother James Milletti in the studio with us.
Welcome. Hello, thanks.
And introduce your wife for us.
This is my wife, Rebecca Milletti. She's here as well.
And Rebecca is going to be joining us as well. And I have to tell you, my sister's name is Becky, but everybody always thought it was short for Rebecca, but it wasn't. My older brother, when my sister was born, I think was in first grade, and he had a crush on a girl named Becky. And so my sister's actually named after my older brother's first grade crush. So it's not Rebecca, it's just Becky.
I'm sure she's proud.
Probably didn't even know it. My brother's probably forgotten all about it. My sister will tune into this and go, "Oh, why did he have to tell that story?" But we're glad to have you in the studio with us. And again, if you did not have the opportunity to listen to the previous program, we will have it online, and you can find it on our YouTube page. And let me encourage you to check that out. And we're going to continue somewhat in the same vein here as well. And I will have this shared over here in just a moment. But let me just let you know that as of today, our Friday night Bible study is still on schedule. And our Sunday services are still on schedule. We have had some people who have asked questions about that, and we are still meeting our regular schedule. And as we were talking in the last half hour, I believe that churches and their pastors and the people in the church, that's what the church is, obviously it's not the building, it's the pastor and the people there that come together to serve God and worship God. I believe that God's people and his pastors should be making these decisions on a church-by-church basis, because my church situation, we meet in a hotel. We're a small church. Pastor Lutz, he meets in his own building, but he's not a large church himself. And then Brother Milletti, you and your wife go to Cleveland Baptist Church, and they're just a little bigger than us combined, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a big program they have running there.
In fact, I may be in the running to actually have more people on Sunday morning than Cleveland Baptist Church. I mean, that is just amazing.
That's something to put on your website, man, right there.
It took a pandemic to do it, but we're there.
Not only is there the church, but there's Heritage Baptist Institute, which it's college level courses Pastor Lutz teaches there. And they're not. They're trying to continue on online.
Video conferencing.
Conferencing.
We're going to do video conferencing for the rest of the semester.
So there's all kinds of decisions to be made.
Yeah.
As we were talking in the previous show, that these pastors, boy, they have a lot that they've never expected to deal with all of a sudden on their plate from 1 second to the next. Man, there's no HBI class for how to deal with your pandemic.
No, I didn't get that when I was in Bible school either.
Right.
And we're going to get to some scripture here in a moment. But before we do that, you're talking about things changing. My wife's an RN, and she gets updates every day, multiple times a day. And it has just been crazy what she's had to go through and the adjustments that she's had to make and still be able to maintain the work that they do. And so certainly my hats off to all of the medical people that are out there and the first responders. And we were talking about praying for pastors in churches. We need to pray for them.
Yeah.
We really do. Regardless of this situation, we need to pray for them on a regular basis because the flu season is here and they're dealing with people who are getting the flu. They're dealing with people who get all kinds of diseases and communicable diseases. And so we need to pray for them. But before I read the scripture here, I did want to kind of get something, and Brother Maletti, you were touching on this, what your churches are doing. I said that the Richfield Bible Baptist Church, we are still having our services, and we do have some people who are choosing to stay home, which is fine because of health and age and different things like that. You're mentioning Cleveland Baptist. What are they doing? What's their current situation?
Pastor Pete Folger has taken over from his dad, Kevin Folger, as the pastor. So he's only been, poor guy. He's only been in there.
His dad's probably going,
right.
Wow.
He's only been in, maybe 6 months,
retire.
6 months or so, and he's faced with this. But he's decided with a lot of counsel, to have services. They're online. But the church is still open for anyone that wants to come, even though he recommends that you don't come. So he's given you a lot of liberty, really, to decide for yourself. He's recommended, if you're an old person, matter of fact, he's almost dictated to old people, you stay home. And he recommends most people stay home, but he does leave the church doors open. And if you do want to come, we've gone to every service so far, and it's gone from, I don't know how many people are there, 700 people a service to 20. Something like that. So some people want to come, but many people are staying away, and he's practically ordered the older people to stay home.
And Pastor Letts, how is your church handling this?
Well, we've gone to live streaming, so we're doing all of our services live streaming. We don't necessarily have the doors open at this point, but we're hoping in the next week or so we can resume, at least doing that. I spent trying to stay on top of calling all of our older folk and kind of talked them out of coming, even when the doors were still open at the beginning of this, because there appears to be a greater vulnerability with elderly and what do they say about the immune system, deficient immune system. So we kind of went through and kind of said, hey, let's stay home, and then we had a young lady that came down with all the symptoms. Actually, I heard of another one yesterday. To be honest, thankfully they both tested negative, but they went through all of the symptoms, so they obviously had something else. But so we just made a decision at that point. The night before, we had about 14 people, which I thought was great, but we just decided to go full live streaming right now, in hopes that 14 or 15-day window is doing what the medical advice is saying to do, and so that's where we're at. So we're just live streaming them all.
Right. And of course, we've been doing YouTube to live stream our services for some time now, and we're still doing that. And I know we have some people who are watching us there. And do either of you see opportunities, maybe that your church, or just personally as a pastor or as a Christian worker, have you seen opportunities to be able to talk to people maybe more receptive to the Lord during this, or no difference at all? Brother Maletti.
We're actively... we hand out tracts and witness to people. We literally go on the street corners and hand out tracts to people as they just pass by. And we try and take opportunities as they present themselves constantly. And the problem is opportunities have dwindled dramatically.
Less people on the street.
Yeah, just less opportunities in every way. We'll even hand out tracts when we go to malls and that kind of thing. Talk to people as we walk past them in post office lines, and there's just limited opportunities now, which is a real... It's a real shame, because to call people to seek God's face right now during this virus, the opportunities, to get people's attention are great, but yet the people to reach out to are dwindling. So it's a predicament.
And Pastor Letts, how's it working in your ministry?
Actually, unintended consequences we were talking about last time is I already know of people that are watching or have been watching our broadcast that would never step foot in our church. And so it's given us an opportunity to, which I'm sure many have experienced well before. This isn't some new revelation. I've just been slow to the ball game. So in that particular sense, it's been good. Obviously, it's heartbreaking because as a pastor, you want your people there, but you also know you try to balance public health and continuing to worship. And it's it's not always a fine line that can be seen. And so we talked about earlier, it depends a lot of times on the area where your church is located. We're in Lakewood, 50,000 people in a 5.5 square mile radius. We're on top of each other. So even now, I mean, you go down Lakewood, there's a few less cars, but there's people walking all over the place. At least down on our end, on the west end or east end. So that has given us an opportunity that way. Again, we're looking at it as a short-term fix, but that has been a good consequence that way.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It just hit me when you were talking about the population of Lakewood. I think you said about 50,000 people in a 5 square mile area. Contrast that with Richfield, where I'm at, Richfield Village and Township. We have about 5,000 people in the same area, so a little bit different.
Yeah, a little bit.
That's part of the difference, and that's why I am not a fan of these one size fits all things. Yeah. And we're going to get into some of the things the governor has been saying, president been saying, but let's go to the scriptures here for a few moments. And in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and I've been preaching through 1 Thessalonians on our Sunday morning services, and we're just finishing up chapter 5, but I keep coming back to this because he says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, starting in verse 1, "But of the times and the seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say, Peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." And he's talking to them here about the time that he was writing about in the previous chapter, the catching away of the believers. So when the Lord comes and the dead in Christ are caught up, the graves are open, the bodies are resurrected. Of course, the soul and spirit are with the Lord in heaven, come with him. And then we who remain, he says in chapter 4 and verse 17, then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. And I like he ends at verse 18, wherefore comfort one another with these words. And so then the natural thing to the Thessalonians is, and to us reading this is, well, when is this going to happen? I mean, I want this to happen. Yeah. I would love a rapture to take place right now. And we get rapture from that phrase caught up. It gets into the Latin rapere, which means to be snatched up quickly. Yeah. And we get the word rapid from that even. And rapture, to be caught up in emotion of something, somebody's enraptured. But at any rate, when we come to this, he said, comfort one another with these words. And then he starts to give us an idea what we're going to see before this takes place. And he says that before the day of the Lord comes, that they're going to be saying peace and safety. And Brother Maletti, you remarked on this earlier, didn't you?
Absolutely, because it's amazing how you can see, there's going to be a great deception in the end, and you can see how easily people are going to buy into it.
Right.
I mean, it's just fascinating to watch.
And it's not that there's necessarily peace and safety. It could be the lack of it. That's why people are asking for it, crying out. And what are people crying out for today? Peace and safety.
Absolutely.
And
So you see this, let me jump in. Uh-huh. So you see this possibly as what's being given as advice to people to calm them down?
Yeah, it's words of comfort. He doesn't want us, in fact, when you look at this section, it starts in verse number 13 of chapter 4, where he doesn't want them to be ignorant. And he says specifically in verse 13, but I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. And then he goes in talking about the things coming there in the end. He doesn't want us to have no hope. He doesn't want us to be sorrowful or anxious or upset. We're to be comforted from what we see. And that's my point. Now, and as I said, Brother Malay talking about the peace and safety there. And then he says sudden destruction comes on a travail, as travail upon a woman with child. Now, you have how many kids?
7.
7. Okay, you got a few kids, a few more than the rest of us combined, I think. But so you should be an expert on this. When your wife was getting ready to give birth to her child, did she just go into full labor immediately?
One of them.
No,
for the most part, no. There's a process, right?
There's a process. And that's what we're talking about here. Women in travail, we're talking about getting ready to give birth. labor pangs. They start slowly and not quite as intense, but as you get closer to the event, which is the coming of the child, the labor pangs get faster and more intense. I believe we're in the last days, and we're seeing things, I think, foreshadowing of the disease and the pestilence. During the last half hour, you were in Amos chapter 4, talking about the famine and the drought and the pestilence and the plague and stuff that came on the people to get their attention. And we see that during the early days of the tribulation, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, as they say in Revelation chapter 6, when the seals are being opened, and they bring many of the same things. And if we're getting close to those events, then we should see foreshadowing. And as a pastor, how would you take that?
That's good stuff.
No, absolutely. And that's one of my questions. Are we in the beginning of sorrows?
Yes.
I mean, of Matthew 24, Luke 21, you know, that refers to the beginning of sorrows, because there's going to be a pattern there that is established that we can look at.
Right.
I told our church, just look at, there's a website, Dredge Report, and it looks like you're looking at the modern day Matthew 24, earthquakes and pestilences and wars and famines and locusts and, you know, and so it kind of brings it all together. I always looked at verse 3 when they say peace and safety. I thought they were giving a false sense of peace and safety. I thought that's how it looked like. They're saying, hey, everything's all right. And then all of a sudden, boom, everything comes on as a thief in the night. And he's saying that's not, like they're saying peace and safety. If they were saying that to us, we're like, no, we understand the Bible side of it. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. That's why I asked that question. Because I thought, I always saw it in just in a different light. I've never seen it presented that way before.
Well, and you know, both things would work too, because, you know, if everybody thinks back about a month or so ago, nobody was worried about anything.
No.
We had peace and safety, didn't we?
Yeah, and you hear...
worried about taxes more than anything else.
You hear Governor DeWine having conference calls with pastors saying it's due to peace and safety of the you know, of the people coming to your church that we need to ask you to shut these churches down.
Right.
And that is something else. And I think Satan might be saying, man, I didn't know it was going to be this easy.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. He hasn't asked us to shut our churches down, though.
Yeah, he's had a conference call that he asked. He didn't demand it, but he did say, I recommend it.
Strong recommendations. Yeah. And then we were talking about that, the governor's stay-at-home order that came out last Sunday that took effect Monday night, 11:59. You have to say 11:59 because if you say Monday night at midnight, that would technically be Sunday night. From most of our perspective. Yeah. But at any rate, he put that out, and the churches were listed as essential businesses,
right,
and media as well, which is how we're all able to be here.
That's right, yeah.
But really, it is just recommendations, and I have, you know, taken some comfort in the fact that they've not, like they have in some states. I believe you brought up Virginia, wasn't it?
I saw Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado. That's right. You said Virginia.
Too,
yeah, Colorado. That's right. You said Colorado. And they've done what in Colorado?
Well, I was seeing that they were actually going into a church service. There was a number of other things that went along with it, but they were going in there and saying you have to break this up because you can't have more than 10 people. Mandating that they wouldn't be able to worship in the way that they would want to.
Yeah, and so that is the concern when they start taking away our rights and ordering certain things now, and then there has to be balance, because I was saying something before we started the programs today. You know, if you're in a church on a flood zone or right alongside the beach, you know, and the hurricane's coming in and they got a 20 to 30 foot storm surge coming, and you know, you're standing there in your doorway and they're telling you mandatory evacuation, you're shaking your fist saying, nobody's going to tell me I have to cancel church services. I mean, sometimes we have to, you know, look at this realistically. God, like I always tell people, God put something between your ears to do more and keep them apart. And
even on your show, you don't have to leave your brains at the door, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's what you say.
Yeah. So when we look at this, and of course, as pastors, we need to balance this, and if we're not looking to the people in our churches for their input, because as you said, Cleveland Baptist Church, much different situation than you at North Coast Baptist Church, much different situation than me at Richfield Bible Baptist Church. we have to balance this with, we know that even if this thing was to fizzle and amount to nothing, there's other things that are going to come, because as a woman with travail, this is going to be happening. Things are going to happen.
Do you think people are going to get out of the habit of coming to church now?
That's an excellent question. There are some people who will. Some people are just going to go, it's kind of easy. Just, I don't have to get up, don't have to get dressed. I just turn
those people weren't with you. They weren't with you the whole way anyway. I'm telling you right now.
You're going to get
those people were not with you. Yeah.
But we still need to try and get them to come to church. I remember reading an article a long time ago. It said, "Pastor, are you pastoring your whole church?" And what he meant by that, he said, you got people who come to your church who only come once a month. That's the only time they go to church. But when they go to your church. He said, what are you doing to reach them so that they'll be the people who will come at least once a week? And then you get them coming once a week. Will they come, every service eventually? And so that was the gist of the article, which I thought was good. But on a flip side with this, I do think that we are going to get people who, like you brought up, Pastor Lutz, people who never would set foot in the door of your church, who now will watch. They won't come in, but they'll watch, and maybe that'll be a stepping stone to coming in.
Sure. They realize we're not the weirdos that they've already been portrayed by maybe other places that they go to. And they say, hey, they're preaching the Bible, they're teaching the Bible. And so, yeah, I think that, and I think you're also going to see, I think it's going to test some of our people of how much they appreciate the church.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've got some people beating the door down, Pastor, when we getting back? And I'm thankful. They're visiting people, they're doing stuff, and praise God that it seems like there's a ramping up. So again,
you don't know what you got until it's gone.
Well,
that's the thing. Yeah. You don't appreciate it till it's taken.
And sometimes in the midst of the storm, we don't know what God's doing. So I think I'm going to speak for myself, but I think talking to enough pastors, there's a sense of, okay, we're willing to give this a try because it's being sold as this is temporary. We're putting some element of trust in you, but I think come Easter, I think the ball game's going to change. Well, every Sunday is Resurrection Sunday, but we know that's a special day.
Yeah.
So
well, and again, like what President Trump said, that we need to reach a point to reevaluate this, because at some point, the cost to the country. We had touched on this. We only have about a couple of minutes here. Yeah. The cost of the country. There's going to be abuse taking place. People cram together in their home. They don't get away from each other. They're stumbling over each other. They get fearful.
Suicide rates have increased already.
And then as businesses start to fail, and we were talking about Cheesecake Factory earlier, said April 1st, they're out of business. They can't pay. There has to be a point where these things have to be reevaluated and say, well, listen, maybe we need to approach this a little differently. The people who are more at risk are the ones who should be self-quarantining, keeping themselves away, which is good advice just dealing with the flu.
Yeah.
But the business of the country needs to get on, and part of the business of the country, not linking business and church necessarily meaning it's business, but is churches. We have a role.
Right.
We have a role to play.
Right.
And I'd like to think that that's one of the reasons we're considered essential businesses, because we do have a role to play to point people to Christ. And maybe one of the flip sides of this is a lot of churches like yourself, you weren't online before with this. And not with the thing,
Zuckerberg's got us now.
Yeah, you're sucked into Facebook to be assimilated. But people around the world can tune into what we have online.
Yeah, right.
And they can hear the gospel online in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing. Hey, we're out of time. I want to thank people to listen. Don't panic. Do pray about this. And if you're contact your church, if they're open, support your pastor, pray for him, and join us next time. We'll be on again Sunday night at 11 p.m. And we're open for business at the Richfield Bible Baptist Church. Thank you for watching. God bless. Stay safe.